to do the film. I couldn't even draw it. So you see, underlying my stance against the establishment, my anti-war stance, my left-wing politics, and everything else, is a simple inability to understand orders. If orders are given to me, I try desperately to obey them, and am unable, as a result, to even go through the simplest routine if I'm ordered to do it.
Hey, DickHeads! Like a pink laser beam of truth beaming straight from San Diego, California to your brain hole. We are your personal unpersons. And maybe if your drugs start to wear off, you might start to remember our names. So, joining me today is the standard DickHeads, starting with Anthony. In case the folks are new, tell them who you are and what you do.
So I am Anthony Trevino. I'm a writer, film critic, and co-host of this cool podcast.
And I'm David Agronoff, author of Goddamn Killing Machines, Punk Rock Ghost Story, and the Splatterpunk Award-nominated Ring of Fire. And yeah, that's me, co-host of this podcast. Also do a separate podcast called Postcards from a Dying World. That's it. Langhorne.
I'm Langhorne J. Tweed.
And today we are covering Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said, the 1970s...
What a 90s cover that is.
Yeah.
I know. I love those covers.
The 1974 Philip K. Dick novel, our second or third novel of the 70s. Okay, so we're going to start with PKD news. And the first bit of news is that
he is still deceased.
All right. Well, that is news because people might be wondering if there's, we do have a PKD robot. You never know.
So, what is life?
Yeah. The first bit of news is
pain, Larry.
That's the first bit of sure.
The first bit of news, take 3, is that the PKD Film Fest is back and in person in New York City.
So what are the dates?
They are Friday, September 17th, Saturday, the 18th, and then there will be a streaming virtual festival on Sunday, September 19th, for those of us who are not in New York City.
Yeah, this should be coming out that week. So.
Oh, great. Okay, so it's at the philipkdickfilmfestival.com. They're going to have 6 features, 95 short films, 16 screenplay and graphic novel entries.
Wow.
3 virtual reality demonstrations, and these come from 21 different countries. So, well done.
A lot. Yeah, that's a lot.
Well done, Dan and crew.
Yeah.
It's 120 official selections this year. So, cool stuff. The next piece of interesting PKD news that came out-ish is the release of the Blade Runner Black Lotus trailer. For those of you who don't know, Black Lotus is a Blade Runner animated series that's coming to Adult Swim on the Cartoon Network.
That we've been talking about for like 2 years now.
Yeah, and so the first trailer was released, so we got our first look at it. Another TV series that kind of promotes the work of PKD and can reach new people is good. So I'm all for Black Lotus. I'm looking forward to watching it when it comes out, and I'm sure we'll probably cover it here on the podcast when it does. Anywho, that's all I've got on PKD news. Anything else you guys want to say about Black Lotus before we move on?
No, but I do want to point out that if there are any animators that listen to this podcast, Eye in the Sky would be a perfect Private Cosmos animated movie.
Yeah, that would be killer. Yeah, but I agree with you, Anthony, that I would just like to see an Eye in the Sky adaptation that kind of fixes the
like a heavy metal kind of thing where each animation style is different and
for each Private Cosmos, that would be perfect. That would be really cool.
Yeah. Or if you started in live action and then anyway,
there's so many ways you could do that and make it awesome. So
And I would just love to see an adaptation of Eye in the Sky fix the Don Wollheim fuckery, which...
I know, that's really a pet peeve of yours.
Well, I understand why Don felt the way he did in the 50s, but and why he made that decision, and I know it was really Ace Books kind of over him really pushing him to do it, but still, yeah. Anyways, okay, so Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said. This is a novel that was released in, I believe, July, or it might have been earlier, of 1974.
Hey, David, what was
Michael?
happening in 1974?
Well, it was popping, Larry, let me tell you.
It was actually popping locking.
The month that Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said was released is the same month that in Berkeley, heiress Patty Hearst was kidnapped outside her apartment. So, yeah.
All right. Let's keep the quotes on that one.
Yeah. And I was also born that year. So,
all right.
And Blazing Saddles was released to give you some movie connection to. This book is as old as Blazing Saddles.
Nice.
Which is a movie.
There's certain parallels there.
Yeah, and Blazing Saddles, a movie that could never be made today, for sure. But so let's get into the writing and publication history of Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said, which the first draft of this was written as far back as 1970. Directly after our friend from Frolics 8, and before he worked on compiling a collection of PKD short fiction for DAW, for Don Wollheim's fledgling new company, DAW. Now, we have an interesting quote in the notes here about this collection that I think is interesting for the timing, and also to give people a little context of the relationship that Phil had with DAW in the 70s.
Donald Wollheim wrote to me and said, "I'd like to do a collection of your stories." I said, "I'm sorry, Don, but I'm going through my stories to sell to Ballantine right now." He wrote back and said, "Well, Betty Ballantine was still editor, Betty and I have different tastes. Give me what Betty doesn't want." And that's exactly what he got. Wollheim read them over and became hysterical. He said, "These are Betty Ballantine rejects." I says, "Don, that's what we contracted for." He says, "Well, the stories aren't very good." And I said, "Yeah, and the price ain't very good either." He published them, but he was grumpy about it. That's my Wollheim story.
Yeah, I know that's not Flow My Tears directly, but I thought that was interesting.
That's a good quote.
Yeah. So, we are in the thick also in the early drafts of Flow My Tears in Divorcepedia. So this was the time when Nancy was leaving with baby Issa, and so there was a lot of drug abuse during this time, a lack of money. There was a lot going on with the drugs and being sick a couple times, and this is when Nancy left. And I believe what Gil talked to us about with the waving a gun around outside, this was this is around the time of when he wrote the first draft. It was September 1970 when Nancy left Phil. So I believe that the first draft was started, because he talks about how he wrote the first 140 pages in a kind of fever pitch, and I think that happened before Nancy left, and then the rest was finished after. But then by the time he was with Tessa, he had done close to 11 drafts of this novel, which with a typewriter, that's a lot of serious work. So that would explain why it took 4 years to go from when he started to when he finished it.
And also why it's dedicated to Tessa. So.
Right. Now, 4 years for most writers to work on a novel is not that strange, but we know that we've seen PKD, put out novels in a shorter time than most crust punks change their underwear. So we know that he can write quick, and he just didn't this time. And that's because, I believe, mostly because a lot of the events that inspired Scanner Darkly also happened during this era.
There really was no point in writing. As a matter of fact, when you conceive of how you write, one writes by going off into privacy, alone. 1 hour of solitude would have meant my demise. After Nancy left with my little girl, it was too risky. I had to be with people. I flooded the house with people. Anybody was welcome, because the sound of their voices, the sound of their activity, the din in the hall, anything, it kept me alive. I literally was unable to kill myself then, because there was too much going on.
Awesome.
Oh, PKD's getting bleak.
That is awesome.
So
That's relatable to me.
Yeah.
Well, and so it's obvious that this, like, all the events that inspired Scanner Darkly happened in this era, and he was just like, hey, if you've got drugs or whatever, you want to come over, or, you know, and there was a while where the rumor was that, I'm sure with a lot of junkies and drug addicts in the area, was that Phil's house was a house that you could hang out at and you could score. So this was a thing that happened. And then in 1971, there was a foreclosure on his house, and he gave an early manuscript to his lawyer for safekeeping, which is very important. Now, if anyone...
Sorry, David, I just have one question. Sorry to break your flow, but...
No.
Where is he at this point? Is he in Fullerton, or...?
No, he had not made it to Orange County.
Oh, okay. So he's still up in San Francisco.
He's still in the
Berkeley.
Bay Area, I believe Berkeley, yeah.
Okay.
So this book by Paul Williams is where a lot of the details of this time come from. The only apparently real world of Philip K. Dick. These are the interviews that Paul Williams did to make the basis of his Rolling Stone piece, which is what really kind of put Phil on the map. This book is for PKD essential people only, because this is basically like him. This is the transcript. A lot of this is the transcript of the interviews that he did about this time in this period, and it's a lot of monotonous talk about the break-in, which we have a quote coming up here about. But if you really want details, like to an insane level of detail about this period and when he was writing it, this book like really gets into details about almost uncomfortable details about everything to do with the breakup and this time. So that's there. Anthony,
well, David, at some point, I want to take a look at that. So
yeah,
I don't want to own it. I just want to take a look at your copy.
Remind me, I'm coming to your neighborhood next week. I will drop off a copy.
Awesome. Yeah.
I got to get my bike tuned up.
Nice.
So, PKD talked to Paul Williams about this. So we have a quote.
My most recent novel, Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said, deals with the USA as a total police state, as you may know. What most readers of SF do not know is that it was actually written back in 1970, not 72 or 73 as generally believed. I wrote the novel and then placed the manuscript, the sole copy, in my lawyer's safe to protect it. In 1971, my house was broken into and my files blown open, and most of my business documents, records, and written notes were stolen. I remain convinced to this day that it was an agency of the U.S. federal government which did this. We have just learned, for example, that the FBI alone conducted 1,500 such illegal burglaries. What most frightens me is to think what might have happened had they found the manuscript of Flow My Tears, a book which so well depicts their own activities in nature. I'm sure it wouldn't have even been published. It is even possible that it was the particular manuscript which they were seeking, that such events could have happened here.
Now, I love the idea of the FBI reading Flow My Tears, the policeman said, and like being like, oh shit, he's on to us. Which, you know, I don't think that would be the reaction of the FBI, but I could be wrong. But yeah.
Paranoid time, though. I mean, this is after Nixon and all that, so...
So we've read close to 18 novels, I think, now, and we've been talking about PKD. God, we've been doing this podcast for what, 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Do we? And forgive me if I'm just forgetting. Did we ever discuss what the event was that really landed him under the scrutiny of the FBI? I really can't remember. Is that later?
It's
Is there? I don't think there's any evidence to him being.
no. There is. A lot of people think that he did it to himself. That he called them. He called them to basically talk about other writers, and it's one of the reasons why there was a rift between him and Ursula Le Guin, is because, for example, there was a bunch of science fiction writers who signed a letter against the Vietnam War. It's the thing that led Judith Merril to leave the country altogether and move to Canada.
Wow.
And so there was a bunch of controversy over a couple. I think Phil was involved in one of the people who was like, hey, like, some of these writers are communists, and so I could be wrong about that, but the theory is that Phil contacted the FBI himself in like one of his states to talk about, now here's where it gets really ugly, and this isn't only apparently real, this
is in Flow My Tears. I mean, that's like almost verbatim.
Yeah.
You make yourself known to the police, you're going to get fucked.
Yeah, exactly. Don't go out there and be like, hey, I'm over here. I'm just letting you know about this other guy because they're just gonna keep looking at you.
So he had black radical neighbors, and the attention that he was paying to them, and he believed that the attention that them getting their neighborhood on the radar is what led to this, in combination with the penultimate truth. He believed that the penultimate truth was the book that, so exposed the fascist government that the combination of these neighbors, and so what exactly it was that did it, like, I think that would be a better question for David Gill, than me. But
when we start running out of book-episodes, we're going to start taking deep dives into these with the other guys then.
Yeah.
Speaking of book-episodes, Anthony, this is the 29th book episode. So
we've done 29 books?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've done 29 books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to sit down. I need a drink. Anyway, go on.
Okay, so on that note, the reason why I think Gil would be a better source for that, from a number of reasons. One, just how well he knows PKD's life, but also he knows Berkeley and knows, like, he would know the exact address of the house he was living in and all that stuff. So we come at this from a storyteller perspective. Gil knows a lot more about PKD's life in general. So,
which, real quick, not to derail the conversation further, I think that the way you just phrased that, David, that we come at it from a storyteller's perspective, I think really does color how I view a lot of these books.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Now, and that's the thing, is some people read PKD because of Gnostic feelings that they get, like, they want, like, the concepts more than the stories, and we come at it.
Some of them read it for Jungian theory.
Yeah, some of them read it for a lot of different things, and I think one of the reasons why we have a different perspective is because we always look at this from a storytelling perspective. Yeah. Period. And we've said that before on the podcast, and we said it on Simulation Nature.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little different on this one for me, but
yeah,
it's not.
So
we'll get there.
Yeah. The Scott Meredith Literary Agency received a completed manuscript on February 7th, 1973. On April 6th, 1973, Dick learned that Doubleday had accepted the novel. That was quick. And a few days later, he received a letter from his editor at Doubleday, Diane Cleaver, telling him how much she liked the book, but offering a few editorial suggestions. Now, I did research Cleaver a little bit, hoping maybe to get her on the podcast, but she died in 1995, so...
Well, you can't get her?
So David was like, whoops!
Oops. Yeah, she died at 53 years old, and she was only 32. She was 32 years old when she edited Flow My Tears. So she was a young editor. And so one thing that people give a lot of gruff to PKD is treatment of women, obviously, but he treated Diane Cleaver with a lot of respect, and however, she wanted to cut the section between Ruth Ray and JT, which were published under the title The Different Stages of Love by the PKD Society newsletter in 1992. So that was put back, or that was published later, but it was a section that that he cut at her direction.
Wait, so that's okay. So that's extra stuff that's not in the novel.
That's not in the novel. Yes.
Okay.
What Phil said was in a letter to Sandra Meisel, I believe it's pronounced Meisel, in August.
Measles, Schmeisel.
I'm going to get hammered for it anyways. It doesn't matter. So in August of 74, now, one of the other things about this time period in 1974, and I have an entire index and a book of the letters of 1974, Phil did not write a lot of fiction during 1974, but he wrote the shit out of some letters in 1974.
So it's a correspondence year. Nice.
It's a correspondence year. There are letters all over the place. That's why there is a bazillion quotes about this book, and I didn't even come close to using them all for the notes.
Because Anthony would have murdered you.
He would have been very upset. And this episode would have been 4 hours long. But
Right.
there are...
Of just quotes.
just quotes, because there are a lot of letters that address Flow My Tears. And it's also because if you figure in that March is when he was having the pink laser beam experience, which, by the way, was happening the day I was born.
I do want to say
Weird
that
flex, David.
I do want to say, just to pimp our Patreon a little, David's notes are accompanying every early version of the episodes. So you can see how much work David put into doing these notes if you pay $1 and get on the Patreon.
There you go.
Which is something I didn't know. I thought the Patreon was exclusively a way to fund me going to do things.
Yeah.
And you should know that
Does
if
do
you
that as well.
Things that are related to the podcast, not just me going to get coffee. Everybody put your tweets away and calm down. All right, what were you saying, David?
And you should know that if you read the notes, that I make no effort to have them make any sense to anyone besides me.
No, but if you follow
Quotes for
along with the notes and watching the show, it actually, you can get something out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So in this letter to Sandra, now there's a ton of letters to Sandra during this year. So throughout, and he talks a lot about his career. So throughout this podcast, we've quoted these letters to her many, many times.
I've just finished the rough draft of a new long SF novel. Blow My Tears, the policeman said. I've reworked it and reworked it. I rewrote the final section 7 times, plus my holographic changes. At one point in the writing, I wrote 140 pages in 48 hours. Alright, I have high hopes for this book. It is the first really new thing I've done since Eye in the Sky. The change is due to a change that overtook me from having taken mescaline, a very large dose that completely unhinged me. I had enormous insights behind this drug, all having to do with those whom I loved, love, will love. Alright, PKD.
All right, so there's a lot to unpack in this quote.
I love that he calls the novel long.
Yeah.
And if only that's the way it was today, instead of 7,000 pages.
Yeah, it's definitely not like Game of Thrones long.
Yeah, no.
Or Stephen King long.
Right.
So first I want to unpack the thing that he says it's the first really new thing he's done since Eye in the Sky.
I kind of agree with him on that. Not maybe Eye in the Sky long, but but it's definitely new.
Yeah, it's interesting because I would say that I do think he's done new things in between then.
Yeah.
Like Man in the High Castle and
Right, yeah, exactly.
And a few things, but I do think it's valid to point out that he knows he's repeating themes, because I a lot of times, like when we had the reaction that Ubik wasn't that totally mind-bending to us because we had already read Eye in the Sky, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think Ubik as a novel is more impressive to the people who read it early in their PKD reading, whereas we we've seen him do the personal cosmos thing like multiple times now, and done it better in, for example, Three Stigmata, where and it's different because in Three Stigmata it doesn't take up the whole novel, right? It's just part of it.
A portion, yeah.
It's a portion of it, whereas Eye in the Sky and Ubik, it's like almost all of it, right? And so for him to say that I haven't really done anything like super new since Eye in the Sky is interesting. Do either? So Larry, you kind of said that. Anthony, how do you feel about this idea that he's saying this is the most original thing he's done in a long time?
I think to him, he probably believes that and feels that way, but I actually thought Galactic Pot Healer was a little bit more fun and original, at least in terms of Dick trying new and different things.
Sure, sure.
So I don't know. I'm not trying to yuck PKD's yum about, being excited about his new book. He's doing something that I've seen him do before in better ways. And in the books in between, for me, I feel like when he says I'm doing something new and interesting, to me that means I'm trying new things out, and it's working or it's not working. So, like, even though I didn't care that much for A Maze of Death, I would say A Maze of Death and Galactic Pot Healer are two books that are a little bit more nuanced in their strangeness and approach to trying to do something a little bit different. Whether or not it works is open to everyone's
even Vulcan's Hammer, right?
Yeah.
That's just a pure sci-fi story, so it's not exploring any,
Yeah. In his mind, themes. In his mind, Vulcan's Hammer would have been earlier than Eye in the Sky because he wrote it so long before. But
was Penultimate Truth before or after Eye in the Sky? I can't remember.
Way after.
Way after. See, so I thought Penultimate Truth was a lot of fun. So
yeah, I know. Yeah, you really like that one.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he's talking about quality here. I think he's thinking about originality.
Yeah, thematically.
Well, right, and I understand that. I just think that
literarily.
I think the books in between were more original. I think Galactic Pot Healer is way more original than this book.
Sure. Well,
in terms of PKD and his writing and what he does, this was not PKD doing something I haven't seen him do before.
Ooh, yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah, I think you're going to get disagreement from the peanut gallery here. Okay, so let's talk about this mescaline thing.
Now, that's a drug I never got to do, so I feel bad about that.
That's also one I've never gotten to do.
Experience.
Well, we know I didn't.
But my mom did mescaline a lot when she was a teenager, and it's. For her, it was a little more clean than what he.
Way to out mom.
But she, it was more akin to LSD. But they were doing back when they were doing this, the same era. It was large amounts that people don't even understand the amount of drugs they were doing back then. So when he says it was a big dose, it's a big dose.
Now, does that give you energy, or is it just you're just tripping balls in your chair?
This is again secondhand because that's the only way I know it. But my mom was so high and hallucinating so much that she saw a giant chicken that used to be in North Park that was above a building. Just step down onto the street and walk away.
Okay.
And that's the only part of like a 10-hour trip that she remembers.
All right, so it sounds like what he's doing here is that he was on this mescaline and he was having all these like visions about his interactions with people, and this is during the time when he had the Scanner Darkly crew like all kind of hanging around his house. So and there's one particular vision which we'll come back to later, which is the one that kind of set off the whole thing. And it's partially because later on PKD claimed to have actually lived this moment in real life that added to his like, oh my gosh, I'm a prophet kind of thing going on. And it's a scene that ended up in the novel.
With acid, I never had any genuine insights, but on mescaline, I was overwhelmed by terribly powerful feelings. Emotions, I guess. I felt an overpowering love for other people, and this is what I put into the novel. It studies different kinds of love, and at last ends with the appearance of an ultimate kind of love, which I had never known of. I'm saying, in answer to this question, what is real, the answer is this kind of overpowering love.
Yeah. And then, so...
Yeah, to most people, to straight people like you, David, it would be, like, it's hard to tell the difference between, like, a mescaline high or an LSD high or a mushroom high, but all those things have their subtle differences that are huge when you're having that trip. So, like, him saying that he had a completely different experience with that and LSD makes perfect sense.
So mescaline was popular during this era, and it's not now. So what happened to mescaline? I mean, just like, do you have any idea? I don't.
No, I.
Let me call Cody.
Yeah, mescaline's still available. I mean, it's not. It hasn't gone away or anything like that, but it's a natural thing. So.
Yeah, Cody would have actually been a great person for this episode.
Yeah. It's akin to peyote.
That's my phone a friend for this one.
I'd call my mom.
Okay, let's move on from that. So for Phil, this overpowering love was this thing, and I think probably this is, if you think about where he's at in Divorcepedia, he's feeling disconnected. He misses his daughter. He wants to be a good father, but he's fucked up on drugs, and he has all these people over, and so he's probably feeling this. He wants this connection. He said that's why he had people over. I want this connection. I want to hear voices. I want to feel people. So I'm sure his brain plus mescaline translated into this like hippy dippy like feeling of like, I want to feel and experience love, which I think there's a way to read this book where you could totally miss that. Like, if
but he mentions that type of experience 3 different times in the book. So
right. I think it's obvious and it's clear and it's there, but what I'm saying is that, like, I've read articles where people are talking about this book and that all they focus on is the police state and all that stuff.
Really?
Yeah.
That's...
It's a bad reading of it. It's a bad reading of it, but that's generally it. I'm saying the first thing that people go to is the police state when they look at the surface level of this book. But it's clear that a lot of his driving force in 1970 when he started it was this vision and this idea of the overpowering love and wanting to kind of express this kind of universe slipping experience with it.
They say I have to say what reality is, and I never had any intention of doing that. And the reason that I never had any intention of doing that is that I don't know. I have no knowledge at all of what reality is. All I can do is plaintively inquire, "Hey gang, what is really real?" And then here's Terry Carr, the great anthologizer and a major figure in the field, and he says, "All right," and he blows on his little whistle like the recreation director at camp has. "All right, time to write about what reality is."
Yeah. I have a feeling somewhere along the way, Terry Carr was like, I want to understand what exactly happened in this novel more. I don't know if he read a draft of it or turned down a draft of it. Terry Carr was he was his editor at Ace with Wollheim. So he wasn't the editor on this book, so I don't know where it came from, but what I think he's trying to say here is that since reality slips throughout this book, he never had any intention of, like, I don't think he cared explaining any of that. Didn't matter to him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, like, this whole explanation at the end with the drugs, I have a feeling that he was told, hey, you got to put some explanation about, like, why he's slipping realities. When I think the original draft, and this is just a guess, But I'm thinking in the early drafts of Flow My Tears, there was, like Man in the High Castle, no explanation.
I tend to agree with you. I don't think there even needed to be an explanation.
I think
That's
Man
not
in the
what
High
this book is
Castle.
about. Yeah.
Man in the High Castle is stronger because Tagomi, when he travels to and from the other universes, you don't know why it's happening, and it does not matter.
Yeah.
It does not matter. And I think for Tavener, the explanation is one of the weaker things in the book.
Yeah.
And if we never really knew or understood why, I think that would lose some readers, but I think for me, it would have been a better book. So,
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I'm not to say, and, so I like this idea that PKDs is like, I don't really need or want to say what reality is. So, so another quote from Letters. Damned if I know. And he was asked about what the reality is in Flow My Tears, I believe.
Damned if I know, but I thought, I'll fake it. So in 1970, I started working on Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said, and it was my intention to resolve the problem by the discovery of what reality really was. So that meant there was a 3-year ellipsis in my writing.
Yeah, so I just think that adds further credence to what we were saying. Is just that, like, after 3 years, like, I think that's in the further drafts is when he was, like, trying to put that stuff in there. So,
right.
Yeah. That just, I don't know. I don't have much to say else about that. I just think that adds credence to that. So the next quote. Yeah, well.
Yeah, well, I just sort of sat there at the typewriter. I did 11 drafts of that novel. I mean, literally. I'm not using that as hyperbole. I had a complicated code system worked out so I wouldn't start feeding old drafts back in, in which case I guess I'd still be there today.
Well,
no wonder PKD had a stroke.
That's true. I mean, I for a short time I wrote on a typewriter like that. You really do have to keep piles of different things separated because there's no way to tell the difference.
Especially if you were like looking at one draft.
And you're doing this over years. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, Laird Barron just tweeted something the other day about how, hey, I used to write on a typewriter, and anybody who's glorifying those fucking days can shut the hell up. It was like,
yeah, no, it wasn't easy.
That sounds like a nightmare. As a kid who grew up with, like, I mean, I always wrote in notebooks, but then I got a computer later. Like, no, thank you. You can keep your typewriter.
Yeah, right.
That sounds overly complicated.
Yeah. So one of our all-time favorite PKD letters was, of course, the one around the time of the 3 Stigmata, where with the dog ate my homework letter about.
Oh, right, yeah.
And the, like, I can't get my car out of hock unless I start getting paid for this. So we've got a progress report letter.
I want to give you a progress report on my new novel, Flow My Tears. I have now read over the rough draft, revised several scenes, added more material, and built up the ending so that it is more effective. And then I have read the novel once again with all these changes. I think it's the best SF novel ever written. Certainly it is the best thing I've ever done, and I've no idea as to how I managed to do it. At one point in 48 hours, I wrote 140 pages. At other times, I revised one sole passage again and again, in one case 7 times, until I had what I wanted. There will be no further changes in the novel when I go to do the final draft. The novel is done. And then PKD had to go, like, take a 3-day nap.
Yeah. So that's a pretty intense description of writing it.
Wow.
Just think about being an editor though for a second. Let's just think about this. If I get a note and my writer says, "Oh yeah, I wrote 140 pages in 48 hours," I'd be like, "Dog,
that's not going to be very good."
Yeah, I need you to reread some of that, please."
So we get into next kind of stuff that we're going to talk to everybody about is the ESP and pink laser beam stuff, because around the time that this novel came out is when this stuff really kicked into gear. So this book came out in 1974, and the pink laser beam situation happened March 18th through March 20th of 1974, and really that was when the major Valis download happened. I believe the first reflection might have happened in February, but it was during this time. So we have
at that point the book was already written, right? Or is he still?
It was long written, but it's to do with the release time. And so a lot of the knowledge that we get about this book is that a lot of people were reacting to Flow My Tears at the same time he was going through the Valis thing. Okay. So it's released into the world. It gets nominated for awards, fills back, but at the same time, after years of not publishing, it'd been 2 years since We Can Build You, right? That was the last one we did. We Can Build You.
Yeah.
It was 2 years since We Could Build You, which was written many years before. So, and everyone knew that. So this was a big fills back kind of moment, and you can't really divorce the reaction to Flow My Tears and all the discussion that's happening in the letters with the fact that he thought a vast intelligence system in space was downloading thoughts from God directly to his brain at the same time. In my opinion, that's kind of important to the Flow My Tears story.
That precognitive thing in my novels has really spooked me. It's really there. You can see how I would become aware of it in direct proportion to the number of books I wrote. If there was such a factor, the more I wrote, the more I'd begin to notice this.
Yeah. So this is just a very important thing that's going on there. And keep going, Anthony, with the idea.
The idea that seized me 27 years ago and never let go is this. Any society in which people meddle in other people's business is not a good society, and a state in which the government knows more about you than you know about yourself, as it's expressed in Flow My Tears, is a state that must be overthrown. It must be a theocracy, a fascist corporate state, or reactionary monopolistic capitalism, or centralistic socialism. That aspect doesn't matter, and I'm saying, excuse me, and I am saying not merely it can happen here, meaning the United States, but rather it did happen here. I remember I was one of the secret Christians who fought it and to at least some extent helped overthrow it.
Okay, so there's a lot going on here. This is the first time since maybe Penultimate Truth and that whole 1964 era where we're getting super political Phil. So because he's been kind of, Do Androids Dream and those books have political aspects to it, but this is the first time in a long time that he's getting way into it, way into the political stuff. And so he also went on to say that he spent 4 to 8 hours a day doing research, trying to understand how this police state would work. I don't know how, what that looks like, but he was really thinking this world out. And so this is from another letter.
If I were to detail that world, it would be completely congruent with the world in Flow My Tears. Then I asked myself, does this explain where the corpus of my writing comes from? And the answer is yes. The entire corpus of my writing deals with the landscape, a kind of world which is somewhat like ours and somewhat different. And all my books interrelate. Ursula Le Guin pointed that out, that all my books seem to take place on a particular alternate world. And in 1974, I actually remembered being in that world. Some of the technology was more advanced than ours, like in my books. They made great use of advanced hydraulics, for instance. Yeah, but was there an auto? That's what I want to know.
Or a flip-flap?
Yeah.
I like the flip-flap.
The flip-flap. It was a ghastly garrison state.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I thought that was a whole new quote. But it was a ghastly garrison state with forced labor camps, and in that other world, I was an active political revolutionary. I was not just a passive opponent of the establishment. I remember we blew up a big fortress, a big prison. Actually, blew it open like you'd blow open a safe. I remember being pursued by the authorities. The establishment was just like it was shown to me in Flow My Tears. In that world, all civil rights movements had failed. Most amazing of all, Christianity was outlawed.
Whoa, so he was full-on revolutionary Phil in this other world wearing a beret and leading the blow shit up.
I'm surprised no one's made a shirt that's just like the Che Guevara shirt.
Yeah,
but it's
Che
PKD. Yeah.
Get on it, listeners.
Right.
We'll buy one with "Flow My Tears," Policeman Said underneath it. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that he's like, and he's kind of talking about a more exciting story.
True.
In this one, like with like revolutionaries and all this stuff, and it's just, this idea that we blew up this big fortress and all this stuff. It's very interesting stuff that he's talking about as far as saying that he like remembered it.
Yeah, like he was in the second Civil War that he portrays in the book.
Yep. And so it's kind of like this book takes place after these events that he kind of said that he remembers.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And it's funny because, like, as writers, a lot of times when we're sitting around in our quiet moments, like we'll run movies in our head or stories in our head. And what I think's going on for Phil is that when he does that, it's almost like he's saying, like, I remembered that.
Right.
I didn't make it up in my head. I remember that.
Right.
Like, maybe he did feel that he remembered it, but it's just, anyways. This the title from the book comes from an opera, which we know that Phil was a big opera guy, and that's what he and Tony Boucher originally bonded on when Boucher would come in looking for opera records in his store, in the record store he worked in. And
we know he hates Wagner.
Right. And he refers to, there's a line towards the end of the book where he refers to the opera as in the book, he says it's the first abstract music ever written. So the title is a reference to Flow My Tears from the 16th century composer John Dowland. But obviously I don't know squat about opera. I listened to it, a recording of it being performed at some point. Not a fan.
As someone that worked in opera for 5 years, I can say, yep.
Yep, it's a thing. So it's 16th century, original piece, and but it was obviously very inspiring to Phil. And all the sections of the book, the four parts, begin with quotes from this opera. So it's important to him, and I'm glad it influenced him, but I will never listen to it again. So that's not an opera guy. So
there are some good operas, but not as many as there should be.
All right, so that's a lot about the writing and publication history.
Yeah.
This is the last thing I would say is that this was Ursula Le Guin nominated it for the Nebula, and it won the John W. Campbell Award, which is the award given by academics, science fiction academics.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and it was, I think it was nominated for the Hugo, but this was Phil back on the map, because he had been kind of out in the wilderness. The only book he had published in a couple years was We Can Build You, which obviously was not super sci-fi. And
it should have been called We Can Bill You for this therapy session of reading your goddamn book. God.
Cha-ching.
Sorry, dude.
I gotta say, that's a pretty clever joke. But
Thank you.
Yeah, so man, I don't know. The award nominations were a big deal for Phil, because I think after like the tough divorce from Nancy and how bad the drugs got for a couple years, I think it cannot be understated how important Flow My Tears was for Phil to move on. But that's it for the writing publication history. Anything else you guys have on this topic, or are we, or is it? Do we have to clear our throats here, Anthony?
Yeah, I think it's time. Larry, is it time?
Time for what? Are we breaking something down? All right. So here is my book report on Flo My Catcher in the Policeman Said Rye, aka Alice in Reverse Wonderland, aka The Prince is a Pauper without an actual pauper being there. So we start with this guy, Jason Taverner, which is what it was said on the audiobook, was Taverner. But I like Taverner better. He's a dick, but he's a very confident dick. He's a movie star. Well, TV star technically, but he has that movie star attitude. So, loves having people below him that worship him. Loves being the king of the world. Just has the best life you can imagine. Has houses all over the world, has women constantly wanting him, can do whatever he wants, never has to worry about being poor, being sad, anything. He is basically leading the best life anyone has ever led. I mean, his girlfriend is one of the most beautiful women in the world. Everyone worships her. Everyone worships him. But he's also banging this thing on the side, right? This girl on the side. And kind of ruining her life in the process by giving her false promises and just basically treating her like trash. So one day he's in his limousine with his beautiful girlfriend, his beautiful actress, singer girlfriend, and the other woman calls and says, "Hey, I need to talk to you in person. It's really important. Won't take long. It's going to be really fast. I promise." So he's like, "Oh, no big deal for me. I'll go handle this because I handle everything because I'm a genetic 6, which means that he believes that the world revolves around him, that he is superior to everyone because he has certain genetic advances." And so he goes to talk to this girl, and she doesn't really want to talk. What she wants to do is shove a space octopus onto his chest and kill him. So he ends up getting the space octopus stuck to his chest. He's a 6, so he reacts quickly, and he manages to get it to a state where he can actually escape and live. He wakes up in the hospital, and he's like, "Oh man, that was terrible, but you're gonna fix it, right?" And his famous girlfriend's like, "Yeah, sure, no problem. They're gonna do what they can do, and you'll be fine." But then he wakes up again in a really bad tenement, hotel, motel, one of those places where there's only one bathroom for an entire floor. You just have a room, and it's terrible, and it's dirty, and he's this rich guy in a beautiful silk suit with a wad of money.
In watts, I believe it is in watts.
He's in watts. And he's like, "All right, this is fine. I don't know how this happened, but I'm sure everything will be okay." So he goes and he makes some phone calls to the people he knows, and everyone he knows says, "I don't know who you are. Why are you calling me? Never call this number again." And so he realizes, wait a second, maybe I'm a nobody now. And how can I be a nobody? Because I'm Jason Taverner. I have 30 million fans that see me every Tuesday night on NBC, one of the 3 stations.
He zips his fly up every week.
Exactly. So he goes to the front desk where there's this weird sort of scrawny guy that is pretty distasteful in general, and says, "I've got $500 here that says you can take me to somewhere that can fix my shit." So he's like, "What? What do you need?" "Well, I don't have any ID. I need to have ID because we live in a police state, which is because there was a civil war with smart people, and we didn't like the smart people, so we just sort of made them go underground or put them in these camps. Because much like, Cambodia, we went the whole Pol Pot route, where it's just a police state. And he's like, oh, all right, so I know someone that can help you out. And they drive through Watts, and they have this conversation that's really might have been explored more, but then maybe shouldn't have been there at all, where we find out that the government is slowly killing black people by reducing their population by half every generation. And our supposed 6 hero, he's all for it. Just like, yeah, black people disappearing sounds perfect to me. And we're supposed to just take that in our stride. But anyway, so we get to this rundown, like, old restaurant or something. And there's secret passages, and it looks like it's going to be real exciting. He goes to this back room where this young girl is the ID maker. And she seems a little weird, but he's attracted to her because she's young and vibrant and kind of weird, and he likes that kind of weird vibe she's giving off. And so he gets his IDs. The girl also is like, well, she doesn't really know he's a 6 or anything, but she's more like, you're a 10, and says, stay with me, just stay the night, and we'll have a little fun, we'll do a little dancing, a little nightlife, and then we'll go back to my place and we'll get down and boogie. And so that's the plan, and he's not really into it because she also said she has a husband who's in one of the camps, and the what are they called? They're not death camps. They're
forced labor camps.
Forced labor camps. Thank you. And so they hang out that night. They have adventures. It seems like she is absolutely a nutbag because she breaks down and has this fit when they're in a bad Italian restaurant. And he's like, all right, I got to get away from this girl. I just can't. I can't do this. And so he tries to get away from her. Doesn't work. He finds out that her IDs work, and it's great. That's great for him. But other than that, he's forced to go back to her and be like, all right, I can't really function on my own. Even though I'm a 6, I don't really know what I'm doing because all of my experience is being rich and being awesome. And now my rich and awesome doesn't seem to matter. So they go back to his place, and there's this cop there, this really kind of, I don't know, you remember the original Batman? And there was the fat detective, back in 1990, the fat detective guy.
Oh, see, when you said original, I went back to...
Yeah, no, the 1990 one. Yeah. Inspector McNulty reminds me of that detective guy. Just sort of like into his job, but not really into his job. Just wants to bust people. That's his entire life. His entire ego is based around busting people. And so he gets suspicious. He takes our JT in, and he's like, you got to do this, you got to do that. I'm going to take your IDs, I'm going to check them out, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and find out what's going on with you. But hey, it's all cool, guy. Here's a pass for a week. You'll be awesome for a week. But he secretly knows, he's like, I'm going to arrest this guy. I mean, he's doomed. Because, cops get theories. When they have theories, they're facts. So our guy leaves, and he's like, all right, I know I'm screwed here. Like, I know they're going to find out my IDs are fake. I'm going to have to do something to get around this. So what does a guy who's a 6 do? He thinks, my best route is either to go to a place without extradition where my money this big wad of cash I have will last a long time, or I can just bang someone and they'll take care of me. So he goes to this club and picks up someone that he knew, even though he no longer exists. He knows her. She doesn't know him. They go back to her place. They hang out. And we are then introduced to this guy, Felix Buckman, who is the Inspector General, the General Auditor,
He's like the biggest police chief.
Yeah, he's one of the.
Yeah.
He's like this super police guy.
Yeah.
But a demoted.
Kind of takes over the novel for a bit.
Yeah, right. So we all of a sudden we kind of forget about our JT, and we move to this cop, this super cop, this power cop. I don't know what you want to call it. Anyway, he has a sister who's a total like party girl. I mean, she's very much into the drug culture. She's like a raver. In my day, she would be called a raver because just her style, the way she does things. So we meet Alice Buckman at the same time we meet Felix Buckman. The super cop has a sister who's a burner, but she's an awesome burner. She's equal to his wit, his intelligence. She's actually smarter than he is, and he's proper in the police sense. Like he has this moral duty, blah blah blah, all that bullshit. And she just wants to have fun, wants to enjoy herself, understands her place in the world, etc., etc. And Buckman finds out about this whole JT thing because he passed by McNulty's desk and he's like, oh, this looks interesting. And finds out this guy doesn't exist. And how can a man not exist in a police state? Everyone exists in a police. So he becomes interested and says, pick this guy up, bring him to me, we'll figure this out. And so they do, eventually. They pick up Jason Taverner and the woman he's staying with. And then there's this interview, Taverner, and they're like, all right, there's some mental dueling going on. McNulty says he's a 7, which is supposed to be greater than a 6, because next generation of genetic eugenics. Are we looking at eugenics, or what are we looking at? Like,
yeah, I think it's eugenics. I think what's going on here is that the 6s were genetically.
It's like that. That one woman from ABBA was part of that genetic experiment by the Germans to make perfect people. That's basically what he's referencing here. And so they have this conversation. Taverner impresses him enough to say that for McNulty to say, well, you don't know what's going on. We need to find out what's going on, and we're going to let you go. We're going to put a bunch of trackers in you, maybe a small, hydrogen bomb, just so that we know where you are at all times and we can blow you up if we choose to. And so he gets out the door of the jail the following morning, and who's there but Alice, Buckman's sister, Alice. And she's like, you got to come with me. I know stuff, and I can free you from the tracking and the bombs and all that stuff. And he's like, oh wow, this is my only option. So our no man Taverner goes with her to her house. Takes a little mescaline, just a little, like a small dose of mescaline. like it never. Okay, first of all, everyone, never trust someone that does a lot of drugs to say it's a small dose. And that's just something you need to know, because a small dose to them will not be a small dose to you. That is fact. Anyway, so he does what she calls a small dose, and it almost sounds like a Terrence McKenna thing. Anyway, so he freaks out. He trips out on mescaline and just can't deal, can't handle it. Just is losing his shit. Can't even speak, can't walk, just tripping out beyond belief. And she's like, God damn it, now I have to give you some Thorazine so you can come down a little bit and be rational. And so she goes off to get him some Thorazine. In the meantime, he freaks out and he's like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta go do some stuff. And look, she has stuff that says I'm a real person. Like she has 2 of my albums. She knows I'm a person. And he's freaking out and like, oh my God, what do I do? And then he goes back inside and he's like, I gotta find her so I know what's going on. And then he finds her and she's a skeleton with new clothes. And he's like, oh my God, that's not cool. That shouldn't happen. He goes back out and a security guard shoots at him and he says, well, I gotta get out of here. So he goes to the next door neighbor who just happens to be this very nice, very lovely potter. She's literally a potter. She makes pots. You remember Ghost? This is like Ghost, but only Demi Moore, not Patrick Swayze.
Well, and he just had to get pottery in there somewhere.
Yeah,
like
for some reason. So actually, but she actually makes pots. Not like the last time we had pottery in a book.
Yeah, she's not healing pots. She's just making
She's
them.
actually making them. He asks her if he can use her car to go to the hospital to get better, and then they end up in a cafe where they sit and they have a meal, and turns out that he's back to being alive, and he's like, wait a second, I'm now a person again? How did that happen? In the meantime, though, they find the body of Alice Buckman, and she's overdosed on some drug. But cops be cops, right? Cops be cops. So General whatever Buckman, General Copman Buckman, and his assistant Herb say, you know what? There needs to be something that happened here that we can use so the other powerful cops don't use this against me, because, I mean, it's a little late to mention this, but Buckman and Buckman were not just brother and sister, not just twins, but a couple. As sometimes happens, you know, we've all seen the...
Right.
We all know the secret garden and all that stuff that happens.
Well, you know, this book is about many different kinds of love.
Yeah, that's true. And so Buckman
which is the uncomfortable. Oh, look at Anthony's face. Come on.
It certainly is, and I was like, all right, I'm wondering how the guys are going to get behind this one and defend it.
Yeah, right.
So no, that's the part you're not gonna hear that from us.
No. So Herb basically says, you know, you got to have a plan, because otherwise they're going to oust you and make you retire by outing you as an incestual man with a kid. And he's like, all right. Super sad. One of my favorite scenes in the book is directly after Buckman finds out his sister wife is dead. He touches his face and feels wetness on it. Doesn't understand that he's crying. It's just a beautiful, hard person finally breaking down. Just a beautiful scene. And then, so Herb says, yeah, you're crying, you're kind of messed up, but you still got to deal with this thing. Otherwise, you got to get ahead of it. This is a political matter. Cops be cops. So they do. They say someone has to go down for this. And we choose, who are we going to choose? We need someone rich. We need someone famous. There's this guy that just turned out to have become famous when he was a no one before. Let's use that guy. So they charge Jason Taverner.
How convenient.
Yeah, right. So they charged Jason Taverner with the murder of Alice, and then we go back to Jason, who takes a nap, wakes up. His old girlfriend is there. His old, sixth girlfriend is back at her house, and she's like, "What did you do?" And because the newspaper says he killed Alice Buckman, and of course he didn't, but doesn't matter, because once police have theories, they're fact. And it's even used in the book, which is another one of my favorite things is when Buckman's like, he really did it. I can't believe that guy killed my sister. And then Herb has to say, he really didn't do it. Keep in mind, he didn't do it.
I just like your cops be cops phrase. That's my favorite thing now.
All right, so then Taverner's like, I'm coming in. I'm going to figure this out. We're going to do this. We're going to, like, you're going to kill me or I'm getting out of it. One or the other. So he goes in. Buckman leaves because he just can't handle the stress of everything that's happening. Can't handle his own emotions. Just is having a full breakdown. The end, basically. And then Herb so the epilogue, which is weird that it's an epilogue. Maybe you just throw in another 50 pages of actually telling the story, but epilogue is Marianne Dominic the Potter becomes famous. Ruth Ray, who slept around a lot, had a lot of husbands, 60 or something like that, 65 husbands, gets married again, seems happy. Alice Buckman, dead. General Buckman.
It's like with Ruth Ray, he was like, hey, 5 marriages ain't nothing.
Yeah.
Like, you could have had 65.
So General Buckman goes and retires on Malta or some island somewhere, and eventually is assassinated by his enemies. We don't care about McNulty. We don't care about that. Oh, Kathy, the young crazy girl, finds out that her husband in the camp was actually dead the whole time, but we knew that, and then she freaks out and goes back to the mental hospital that she came from. Heather Hart quits the business as the girlfriend from the beginning. She quits the business and goes into obscurity. Taverner lives for a long time and ends up dying in some house with a bunch of memorabilia, mostly forgotten, but still happy, I guess, in the end. That's the story.
Jeez. Okay. That's
the story.
That was very
Might be
restrained.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a very restrained version of story breakdown. I'm kind of surprised. That's probably.
I'm trying to get it down to that, that shortened time span. So
I don't know about that, but
It certainly wasn't shorter.
Okay, so the themes that I have here, the major themes are the what is love aspect.
Baby, don't hurt me.
Yeah, exactly. World building, police state, drug and multiverse. Jason as a different kind of PKD protagonist.
Definitely.
And then just a little general. So those are the things we're going to break it down to. So I'm going to start with world building, even though I have what is love first in my notes. With world building, one of the first things I want to say that's interesting about this book is that we remember that he had the fight with Don Wollheim over when Martian time slip took place, right?
Right.
Well, this is way more egregious because it takes place in 1988.
Yeah.
And there's already Martian lunar colonies, and it's a very
the whole 9 yards.
right. So even if you were taking this as having been written in 1970, that's still only 18 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So So this goes to the idea that PKD was talking about how, at first I just kind of laughed at this when I was reading it, but then remember he was saying that the technology was different in these other universes that he claimed to remember. And it's, I think very specifically for him, having it be 1988 is important because I think he wants to set aside that this is not, he's making clear on page 5 that this is not our future at all. This is another universe.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think, being that is on page 5, that is very important mission statement for this book. What says you guys? I don't know.
I don't know. I think you might be ascribing too much to that specific date and that concept, but also, you could be absolutely right. I just don't know if it really matters one way or the other.
So they don't turn on those 3D color TV sets to see the special guest star. There are 1,000 special guests scattered over the surface of Earth and a few in the Martian colonies.
That's great.
And then it's specifically somewhere around there. It specifically says 1988. Oh no, the very first thing.
Yeah, it's in there. It's in
Tuesday, October 11th, 1988.
Yeah.
is the first sentence.
Yeah, right.
And he introduces the show and how popular Tavener is right off the bat,
and the ego and like all of those elements. First of all, to me, more important than the date is that PKD is setting up a character that is antithetical to any hero he's ever done before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
While every other hero is a flawed, messed up,
working class,
incompetent, working class, like all these, like
sad.
From head to toe, totally different.
Pod healers, tire regroovers, like,
exactly.
Grocery store clerks.
Right.
Yeah.
And in this, immediately he introduces a character that's our protagonist that has everything going for him. Not just going for him, but has the personality type that means he can handle any problem.
But then 20 pages later, he doesn't exist anymore. So then
it's a reverse Alice in Wonderland. I mean, that's how I looked at it from the beginning. He's a guy who's in this sort of fantasy world of I'm right all the time, everything works for me, and then is just thrust into hell, his own, this absolute opposite world. And I know that's not a new story type. That story's been done several times, but to see it done by PKD is very different. Is very different to see first of all, the opposite protagonist then thrust into a world that he doesn't know but still can handle. So
yeah, because I guess where he still remains a unlikely PKD protagonist is that even though he's suddenly nobody and an unperson,
he still makes the right moves.
Yeah,
or at least some version of the right move.
He still has the skills that made him get to the successful level that he was.
Correct.
Now, I've seen a lot of commentary, and I know we'll get to this later from Kim Stanley Robinson, but he thinks that Tavener's like going from somebody to nobody is like a good analogy or a good metaphor for PKD in the science fiction community, where he went from having all this success, which in hindsight the real success didn't come for PKD until after his death.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, which is another way of being an unperson, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's
but if
funny,
PKD never saw himself as that type of person,
no,
how is this a direct reflection of his?
I would agree.
His experience.
I would agree. I think that is a little much for that theory. I'm just putting it out there that some people think that. So the technology in this future there's all kinds of funny, awesome. We haven't seen this kind of PKD technology in a while. From the microtrans to the mini
sphincters,
H-bombs.
the many sphincters.
Yeah,
there's so many sphincters.
The 3 and 4D pictures, the 6s, those kinds of things. Those
microtransmitters, all that.
Yeah. So, so for those who think that this maybe is not a science fiction,
H-bomb.
I have seen some people say that this is not as science fiction as some of the other PKD books. I call bullshit on that. This is definitely has still some of its pulpy tendencies.
Yeah, it does have all the elements, but they're kind of pushed to the background. Because just want to get this out of the way and tell you my theory, and this might be tainted by our having Gil on the last episode talking about the literary elements that PKD was trying to do, and a conversation I had last week comparing PKD to J.D. Salinger. But to me, this book read like a literary novel with the sci-fi elements pushed to the background, because he's concentrating so much more on character interaction. Like that's why I said the Catcher in the Rye thing. This is like Franny and Zooey. I mean, this is writing about people. This isn't story that he's concentrating on. This is people and relationships, and everything he was trying to do with We Can Build You. I think he succeeds so much better in this. And I know those two were written far apart, but I think that's what he's talking about, taking that next step or doing something different, is he actually succeeded in writing a literary sci-fi novel.
Right, which is why I kind of want to get some of the world building stuff out of the way, and there is a lot of it, because that second Civil War is really huge and important there. There's a part on page 24 that
it's important, but it's not gone into in depth. I mean, it's not like he spent pages on it.
No, he does it subtly.
Yeah,
and that's kind of what I want to talk about, because I really like that. So there's a scene where he almost runs over a black man in his car, right?
Yeah.
And it's page 24. And it says, Jason felt an odd emotion. There were so few blacks alive now because of Tidman's notorious sterilization bill passed by Congress back in the terrible days of the insurrection. And then he also, like later on in the page, he says, if I hit him with my car, it would mean the death penalty now. Protected by 1,000 laws, you can jeer at them. You can't get into fist fight with one without risking a felony rap and 10 years in prison. So these are all like...
But that's not him saying that. That's the desk clerk.
Right. But the idea...
And his response is, fuck him. That's his whole response to that. And he's still supposed to be our protagonist. I mean, that's hard to stick with, you know. You have to really gloss over that to
I don't think, well,
with our guy.
Doesn't he say
he says
I don't like your
black
racism
people for me.
He says something about I don't really like your racist attitude at some point.
No,
so.
that's what the driver says to him.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, but what I'm saying here is that this idea that people of color in this world are endangered is a really interesting thing that is done really subtly. It's not a major plot point in the story,
no.
but it's done in a way that really sells the world building in a subtle way, and I appreciated that it was done subtly. Another thing is, and this is a part that I thought
it could be done just simply. Another aspect of the world building is that everything in the opening is very intentional, because PKD does reversals with everything. In the first 25 pages, everything is reversed. So them being in Watts, being a couple of white guys in Watts, he's saying, you know, well, they're killing the black people. There can't be any fights. Like, there's always that, you know, we're in an environment where now things are flipped. It's not a black neighborhood because it can't be, because they don't really exist anymore. You know, I'm rich, and then I'm still rich, but I'm poor. Like, everything is reversed.
Yeah. Well, I'm just commenting on what I think is going on with the world building, but I know. But I think there is a lot of really interesting commentary, and you're right, he is kind of reversing things. One scene that may kind of come off as just being funny is on, but I think there's a really interesting world building thing going on here, which is on page 54 when Kathy asks, she's the fake ID person, "Do you want to go watch a Captain Kirk?" "Whatever," he said briefly. "There's a good one at Cinema 12. It's set on a planet in the Betelgeuse system, a lot like Tarbird's planet. You know, the Proxima system. Only in the Captain Kirk is inhabited by minions of an invisible..." "I saw it," he said. "As a matter of fact, a year ago they had Jeff Pomeroy, who played Captain Kirk, in the picture on his show. And they even ran a short scene, the unusual flick plugging, you visit us deal with Pomeroy Studios." So Pomeroy, being not William Shatner, being the star of the Captain Kirks.
Well, he uses almost entirely fake names for actors.
But I think this is specifically
barring
done,
a few, yeah.
I think this is specifically done to set aside that there are similar things in that universe, but they're slightly different. And I think it's a subtle world building thing that they're talking about the Captain Kirks and this other star who's in them. And so I think that was like, I don't know, I just thought that was a cool world building. He also mentioned...
Yeah, I don't know how common that was back then. We know now, like, I mean, that's a trope now. The generic make things subtly different thing.
Right.
I don't know if it was back then.
Yeah, in 1974, I think that was a little different.
That was post Planet of the Apes, so that's, I mean, the ultimate in that reversal. So
sure.
For that.
But the mentions of car phones there is a good, easy, early form of technology. But I just personally feel like that Star Trek thing is a way to subtly say that this is a slightly different universe.
Yeah.
The next thing with the world building is the introduction of the Sixes, and I think there's a really good scene on page 128 that's where it's explained the Sixes, eugenic experiments themselves and secret ones, seemed unusually gullible when confronted with the assertion that there existed an additional project as classified as their own. So it is explained specifically that the Sixes are eugenics. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And this further connects to the idea that they're like, that there is a racial element to to this second American Civil War, which, as it almost happened a couple months ago.
Yeah, right.
It's certainly not that out of the realm of the possibility.
Right.
So
can we hold on a second? Because Anthony hasn't said anything in a while. I want to get Anthony's take, first of all, on the protagonist being a totally different character. Because I'm really
just listening to you
in what parts of this you didn't enjoy.
I'm just listening to you guys discuss it. You're asking my opinion on Jason Taverner being so different from all of Dick's other sad sacks, where we finally get a PKD character who's confident, who's cocky, who's, for all intents and purposes, very unlikable.
Yeah.
I like it. I'm all for it.
Okay.
I'm all for it. But what you're gonna come to find later as we talk more about it, and I'll get more into this when we're giving our overall opinions, is that becomes one of the biggest reasons why I feel the way I do about this book by the end.
Okay.
All right, so
is that it's too easy for him, or it's
that's part of it.
Yeah.
But I'll go more into detail with it, because, like, again, I'm understanding all what you guys are saying, and I agree with you. It's just that I'm not so sure I'm willing to give Dick credit based off of how I feel by how I felt by the end of the book.
Okay.
Go ahead, David.
Okay, so that's all I really have on just general world building, but I think the police state stuff is obviously the stuff that people are most drawn to with this novel.
Really? And I just don't find that very interesting.
Well, the police state stuff is really... They talk about it in the back copy. It seems like it's going to play a bigger part in the book, but the police state stuff is really window dressing to all this other stuff.
But let's talk a little bit about like what makes up this police state, because obviously this is one of the things that PKD thought was important to the book, because well,
he was wrong.
Well, in his he was
vision, wrong, or he didn't do it right, but he was one or the other.
Well, but his vision of this world was it's important that it's in the post Second Civil War era, where the country is rebuilding from this civil war after he and his buddies put on their berets and blew up the big fortress. Right? So
that's totally ancillary to the book, but yeah, I know what you're saying.
Right, but I like some of these details. On page 19, they'll assume I'm a student or a teacher escaped from one of the campuses. I'll spend the rest of my life as a slave doing heavy labor. I'm what they call an unperson. And so I just really want to unpack for a minute. I think we're just coming off Vietnam, so the idea that the students would be like these unpersons, or that the students would be this marginalized, hated, radical class.
Well, that's I mean, it was happening in the U.S., but it was also happening in Cambodia, which we were closely tied to. So, we're talking about the world seemed to start looking like it was going to be this fascist police state, where intellect was frowned upon. So, I mean, that makes perfect sense that he would have those feelings that would come to fruition.
Yeah, and then on the next page, just because I'm there, when I spent 10 years of my life in a quarry on Luna using a manual pickaxe, which is funny. But then he also says, they'll assume I'm an escaped student, and I really think that there's something really interesting going on there with the whole escaped student thing, and this idea that, these intellectuals are something to be afraid of is an interesting way to, and we see it now with the anti-intellectualism of the right wing.
Yeah.
In our almost second Civil War, where But
it was I don't know the timeline, David, but it was also happening in the Philippines. I don't know if it's exactly the same era, but anti-intellectualism was a real thing in the 70s.
Right, and I don't think it's gone away. So I do think that even though you can say that it's kind of subtle or besides the point of the story, I think it's an interesting commentary that PKD is making, and it's a good one. On page 61 is the first mention of the FLCs, and Jason said, nobody remembers me. I have no birth certificate. I was never born, never even born. So naturally I had no ID cards except a forged set I bought from a Pole Think for $2,000 plus $1,000 for my contact. I'm carrying them around, but God, they may have microtransmitters in them, and even knowing that, I have to keep them on me. You know why? Even you at the top, you don't know how this society works. Yesterday, I had 30 million viewers who would have shrieked their aggrieved heads off if a pole or a gnat had so much as touched me. Now I'm looking down the eyes of an FLC. What's an FLC? Forced labor camp. So I think this is a really great moment here in the book as far as that stuff goes, where this PKD fear of being an unperson and and you know, seen through the eyes of this guy who went from being this really successful person to nothing. And you know, I think he's really illustrating, and what I like about it is that it doesn't overtake the novel. It's not like the whole thing is like, think of the opposite being Equilibrium, right? The movie Equilibrium,
Right.
where like the whole thing is the tetragrammatron, and there's art, and there's like entire scenes where they're like crying over burning art. It's just like these subtle moments in Flow My Tears that don't seem like they're not like tied super heavily to the plot,
Right.
but they're really important and subtly done.
They are still essential.
They're essential, and I really like these moments, and this is one that I really liked. Page 72, like 10 pages later, the error began with a poll inspect and worked its way to poll dat. I love how it's the PKD. I'll just leave letters off and make it sound like
right. That makes it futuristic and sci-fi.
Yeah, and their pool of data at Memphis, Tennessee, even my fingerprint, footprint, and voice print and EEG print, they probably won't be able to straighten it out. So it's a computer error. You know, that the police state is this computerized bureaucracy.
It's fully incompetent.
And it's a worldwide computerized police state. And then the next real thing that kind of sells this is the 7-day pass. Taverner is like, okay, well, we don't know who you are, but you know, we'll give you this 7-day pass, and you'll be able to move, and that only works for so long, right? Yeah. And then the last thing that I think is really interesting about the police state, and then we can move on from this, is that Felix himself, and I almost said Felix Baumgartner, that's the baseball player. Felix Buckman is in charge of the death camps. And he becomes...
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. He's a really important character for all this. So, all right. So, any last things?
Well, he's basically the eponymous character. I mean, if you want to look at it that way, I mean,
yeah. And I think it's
he is the policeman that cries. So.
Yeah. Right. And yes, that's a little on the nose for the title, right? But at the same time, I think the title is partially why people immediately assume that a heavy role for the police state in the story. It's done very subtly, but the police state is, I think, tied to all elements of the book.
Well, here's my theory, David, is that the title is directly correlated to Catcher in the Rye. I think he wanted to do that same kind of title.
Okay.
Where it's not tied to the plot. It's an entirely ancillary thing, or you know, something that evokes emotion, but doesn't necessarily dictate what the novel's about.
If that's true, he says he has the title word for word in parts of the book, almost.
No, in parts. Yeah, yeah.
And then Buckman has a scene
but then so does Catcher in the Rye.
That's true. Okay. But I don't know. I think that, and he has the on the nose scene with Buckman in the tear, which is a great scene.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. But I think I don't know. But the police state thing, I understand why people think it's so important.
Gravitate towards that. Yeah.
Gravitate towards it. I also see why you say it's ancillary. I think the truth, again, is somewhere in between. I think you cannot have this novel without it being taking place in the remains of the Second American Civil War that happened sometime early in the 80s.
Right.
Right. And then, you know, even though the What is Love theme is important, and Taverner's unpersonhood is a huge part of it. It all ties together. And one of the things that I think is great about this novel is that you have all those elements, and I actually think they work together. There are some cringy things, especially with the Buckman twins, and there are things that don't work for me, but the positives so outweigh the negatives, in the sense of we've seen PKD in the past like come up with all kinds of different ideas, and for him to meld them and bring them all together is really cool. So anything else on the police state stuff? I mean, I'm sure we'll mention it. Anthony, do you have any thoughts on because you and I are both fans of a good dystopia and a good setting like that. Like, how did you feel about the dystopic elements of this book?
Like I said before, it's window dressing to the other stuff that he's talking about. It's very... I think part of the issue is for newer people coming to this book, is that we're so attuned to sci-fi and even works that have been adapted from Dick's work, having a police state that is very aggressive and very violent, and in this one, as I've said before, they're about as intimidating as mall security.
Yeah, right.
Where
they're nice and passing out joints and shit.
And then they're like, you can go, you need some money? It doesn't... I can't... I feel like I agree to an extent that it needs to be subtle to focus on the other things Dick is getting at, but because the police state in this seems so lackadaisical about everything, even when he's arrested, there's no tension for me between Taverner trying to maneuver his way through this police state. Because he's basically... They give him a fucking pass! He's just like, well, go on, it's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to curse. Sorry. But
no, you can. But here's the thing. Here's why I think it's a great police state.
Here's why I think you're wrong, Anthony.
Oh, no. No, you're right to have your opinion. I'm telling you mine.
Sure, go ahead.
I like that the police state is kind of milquetoast in here, because I think that for a police state to continue to function and to continue to work where people will like passively live with it, they have to think it's not so bad.
Sure.
And that is the insidious nature of this police state. It is not crazy. It's not over the top. And you could see people just accepting it because, hey, we went through this terrible second Civil War and now things are a little more chill. We may not have people of color anymore and some other things.
And we may be all right with pedophilia.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, we should talk about that scene as well. But he also says it straight out. Like, the police are milquetoast, except for when they want to arrest you. That's when they're dicks.
Yeah.
Up to the point where they arrest you, they're assholes, and then they're nice. Prior to them being aware of you, they're nice. After they've arrested you, they're nice. But that point where you're the enemy, you are really the enemy. So I think that's more realistic than the over-the-top police states and all that stuff. Because I think you're right, David, is that people will accept a police state that's milquetoast. But when it goes overboard, people are going to flip out.
And then it's too late. And so we're going to come back to the love stuff, even though I have it first in my notes. We're going to come back to that. The next themes that I really kind of want to address is and we already kind of addressed this earlier a little bit, but the drugs and the multiverse thing. Let's talk about waking up in this other universe. So on page 13 is the first time. It's as early as page 13. Pain, he opened his eyes reflectively, he touched his chest. His hand-tailored silk suit had vanished. He wore a cotton hospital robe laying flat on the gurney. And, he's just starting to get the inklings of it. And then slowly he was like, wait, I'm not in the hospital now, not all these things. And we don't understand later why it's happening. And later we get some kind of ridiculous explanation for it. But
they're all caught in Alice's mindscape.
Right.
But not really. But kind of. But not really. But kind of. But not really.
Every time someone takes the drug that changes reality, it changes all reality, is what the idea is.
That's the idea, but...
Yeah. So what
specifically with him, it's because of Alice has that obsession with him, therefore she makes him an unperson so she can meet him, blah, blah, blah.
Right. And so... but then I do think, as much as I kind of think, I just wish that, as I said earlier, that it was like Tagomi in Man in the High Castle, that it wasn't explained, that it's just the universe hopping happened, would have been slightly better for me. I don't hate the drug explanation, I just kind of think it's a little ridiculous. However, when the drug starts wearing off, there are some really cool moments that come out of the drug wearing off. On page 167, at the front gate of the house, the cop appeared, his face distorted. He stood sideways, reflexively, lifted his gun, held it with both hands, and fired at Jason, but the gun wavered. The cop was trembling too badly. And it talks about him running to his quibble, which, by the way, cars are either called quibbles or flip-flaps. Flying cars. Yeah, and I do love the name quibbles and flip-flaps. Although every time you say flip-flap, you're going to start to say flip-flop. It's hard not to.
I don't know. I say flippity-flap a lot, so the flip-flap comes naturally.
I love the scene where the cop is like trying to arrest him, but he's unfazing from reality.
Right.
Because, you know, I thought this was a really cool moment. And then it was not the mescaline, he realized. The cop saw it too, her lying there, the ancient skeleton, as if dead all these years. That was a cool moment. You mentioned it in the breakdown. Just like, oh wait, she's suddenly a skeleton.
Yeah, right.
And then he does tell the cop, or Mary does say, I'm not an escaped student, nor am I escaped from a forced labor camp. But I am in trouble. And then she says, did you take a toxic drug? And
probably.
Yeah, probably. And then
but I'm a 6, so it's cool, is basically what he says.
Yeah. And then on 178, as always, he said to himself, this is how it's been up to the other day. My reality is leaking back, because that records that were once blank are now suddenly his records again.
Which is very cool. I mean, that was a very cool moment.
Yeah. I am one of
them being blank, not them coming back, but them being blank in the first place.
I have a blank record, and I don't know why.
That was great, I thought.
Yes. Maybe I'm one of the only one of a great number of people leading synthetic lives of popularity, money, power by means of a capsule, while living meanwhile in a bug-infested, ratty old hotel on Skid Row. That's almost a whole PKD novel just thrown away in a paragraph.
Well, we'll get to that novel.
Yeah. Yes. What happened, Jason Taverner thought, this is earlier on that same page, is that a drug wore off. Somebody stopped giving it to me, and I woke up to reality. There in a shabby, broken-down hotel with a cracked mirror and bug-infested mattress. And I stayed that way until Alice gave me another dose.
Now, see, that would have made sense if he had added some kind of insecurity within Taverner, you know, that said that he was afraid that he might be a nobody underneath all this glamour and stuff. but that's not the way the book was written. So that
Yeah, and I
really
should point out that every time I give page numbers, I'm giving the vintage edition because that's what I have. Yeah, and then on page 207 and 208, he says time bending is a function of the brain. It's a structuralization of perception and orientation. This is the pseudoscience we haven't had in like the PKD pseudoscience
right.
like section in a while. A drug such as KR3 breaks down the brain's ability to exclude one unit of space out of another. You know, we never did this. We should have been keeping a running tally of all the fake drug names. Like, so KR3,
Oh, that's yeah.
Choosy and all that. Yeah.
There's
But-
way too many drug names to keep track of. Maybe somebody has over the years.
Yeah.
We'll find a database somewhere of all the drugs that PKD used in
Page
his
two-
books.
Page 211, he passed over to a universe in which he didn't exist, and passed over with him were objects of his precept system. And then the drug wore off, he passed back again. What actually locked him back here was nothing he took or didn't take. So as of course a file came back to us at Data Central. So like the files like reappear. Like when he appears and disappears, his files, everything disappears with him. The reality shifts. Okay. Some funny things I liked, and I already mentioned this, the blank records. I also liked on page 92 when he called somebody a celebrity fucker. Just thought was really funny. But here's the thing that's interesting about when you're talking about the literary sense of this book. Usually I have a list of all kinds of different parts that made me laugh. The celebrity fucker and the blank records were the only things that I kind of laughed out loud at.
Yeah, this is not a funny one. Yeah.
This is not a funny book. And I've grown to expect... Oh, Anthony, you found
I think
words funny?
Anthony might disagree.
Yeah, you're muted, bud. But if you... Did you find this funny? Did you laugh?
I mean, I found certain things hilarious. I think only because I had never seen Dick throw out F-bombs in such a way that he does in this novel. But let me see if I can find it.
I mean, the technology made me laugh, like the flip-flaps and the quibbles and the...
And he made that fart joke right in the middle of the book for some reason. You
Well,
don't
it's
even
just-
remember the fart
I
joke,
think-
do you?
I think Dick just being overly like aggressive in his dialogue sometimes is not what I expect from him. For example, on page 100, he said, "But see, I had a thing going with my boss. The Poles wanted to drag me off to a forced labor camp, one in Georgia, where I'd be gangbanged to death by rednecks, but he protected me." And I was like, this is not really what I expect from Dick. There was one that it was that I was like, okay, well that's a turn of phrase I have not heard. It was between the conversation between Felix and Alice where I can't figure out where I highlighted it, but somebody says muff dive into contrition, and I was like, all right, I guess.
There's also a line when he's with Kathy where he calls her like a psycho something or other, and that's just the way it is, but I can't remember. I couldn't find it when I went back to look for it.
Yeah, here it is. It's on page 90, where her and Felix are talking, and he goes, "Fetishist," he snapped at her with fury. "We process 100 of you a day, you and your leather and chainmail and dildos. God." He stood breathing noisily, feeling himself shake. I just imagine that he's I'm so mad about this non-vanilla sex.
Right?
And then later on the next page she goes, "And what would he do?" She massaged his short cropped gray hair. "Tell me please, sir. Muff dive me into panting contrition." What the fuck are we talking about?
Now that first conversation was so weird.
Well,
Between those two.
it made me kind of wonder, like, what Dick's real relationship with sex is. at this point, having read so many of these books, because it feels like he has this desire for what you would consider not the norm, but also I was like, I don't understand where he lies within this kind of world, because it's in the same world where, you know, being into BDSM is shunned and too taboo, but at the same time, is cool, man. Pedophilia is fine.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't have an answer, but I would like to pose the question of, like, how do you guys feel about the kind of the sexual relationships represented in this book, especially the ones that are, for all intents and purposes, not cool, and not you know, I'm all for the BDSM and leather and chains, so I think we all know which one I'm talking about. So that's not cool.
And the phone orgies.
Oh well, which I was like, you know, when did phone sex hotlines become a thing? You know,
Definitely after this, I think.
After this, yeah.
Well, what do I know?
Late '80s, late '80s, early '90s.
Yeah. So, but I'm
Larry's very sure of that.
And I have the phone bills to prove it.
Oh boy.
Okay.
But so I found this kind of interesting, and it just, I couldn't figure out, like, in this world, we're shunning
what is right and what is wrong.
We're shunning
like,
BDSM, but we're allowing exactly, yeah, like, where is that moral line in this society? And is that Dick saying all these fascists who want a police state are just a bunch of fucking creeps and pedophiles? But I don't know, and I'm fully ready to admit I don't know.
I think what he was trying to do was set up the idea that this is a different universe and the rules are different, and, like, whether it's positive or negative is well, it's I think it's just the idea that it's just another thing that makes this universe different from ours, right? And I think he was doing it. I think this whole idea of the different kinds of love that is going on,
it could tie into that.
I think the sexuality is separate from that because of the whole gas
because
station.
the guy said he loved the kid.
Well,
he didn't say he was just having him for sex. He said, I love this boy, I want to marry him.
Here's my NAMBLA card.
Yeah, well, he did say that he one of the quotes he and this is not, obviously, this would not be PC today to talk about, but he did say in one of his quotes that he was worried that people would think this book was an argument for homosexuality and other kinds of sexualities, and he said that wasn't it. And I should have used that quote. Yeah.
I mean, we're coming off the free love era. I mean, we're still in the free love era. But coming off the, you know, the 60s style where everybody's kind of sobering up.
Yeah, I'm kind of processing this live as we're talking about it, but my thought on this is that I believe he was trying to make this idea that in this universe, the rules are different, things are different, and it's, I think, by that quote of him saying, I hope people don't think that it's an argument for this, is that he's specifically saying, I'm not saying whether it's positive or negative, it's just, it's a different thing.
I'm making a judgment call.
I'm not making a judgment call, and so the incest, the pedophilia, the different things, I think...
but that just adds to this concept of this book is about all different kinds of love.
David Gill, where are you at when I need you most?
Yeah.
To help me understand this.
Right.
I think you're right, Anthony, because...
Maybe we need like a bat signal for Gill.
PKD is very much a conservative sexual person.
I agree.
As far as we know.
Well,
as far as we've been told.
Well, from what I can gather, I feel, and I could be totally wrong, and I'm sure.
Yeah, he could have a secret sex dungeon that we never found out about. So
I mean, I want to believe he found a box of BDSM magazines and was like, well, that's going in the book. Yeah. But I remember setting this book down after I read this chapter and just thinking to myself, it's cool, man. It's cool if you want to have sex with the lights on. Or if you don't want to just have missionary vanilla sex. Man, it's fine, dude. Just relax. Because I get this... I get this weird sexual repression vibe
Yeah.
from Dick.
I do too.
In a lot of this stuff, and it might be because I'm, I'm pretty open about my sexuality, right? Like so maybe like I don't process it in the way that Dick would, but I'm trying to understand Dick through the books that we read, and it just seems like he's really yucking a lot of yums when he wants to yum it too.
Right.
But that
But
does not
also-
include the pedophilia, though.
We have a lot of stuff that we could unpack here, is because, like, you're a younger generation, so AIDS was in control when you came up, sort of. I'm not going to say totally, but safe sex was a thing. When David and I were coming up, it was, if you got bit by a mosquito, you could die. Sex became this very, very taboo subject because, who knows what could happen.
Would you say it was
Dick
like
came up-
demonized?
Dick came up in a very rigid sort of male-female, missionary position world. And then free love came after that.
And he was probably trying to process a lot of it, not
Yeah,
understanding how
I mean-
them kids. And then he ends, and keep in mind, he, during this era, marries Tessa, who was much younger than him.
Yeah.
At that time, and hanging out with a lot of the free lovers, doing all kinds of drugs at his house before it got foreclosed in 1971. So he's in the Bay Area with all these drug.
Yeah, that's what I'm
heads
saying.
over.
I mean, there's a crazy amount to unpack here.
They were like, Phil, you don't have to like put a sheet between you guys when you're
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah, you can do anything between the hole and the sheet.
So
Anyway,
Oh,
it's just
okay.
something. It's just something that really I think I was thinking of a lot about in this book, and then that kind of expanded into how I've started to interpret Dick's relationships with women and how he writes about them, and it's not positive, guys.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry, old sci-fi nerds who get mad at me for saying this. It's not, and it's okay to acknowledge that there's something that isn't all that great in a book that you like. I don't know.
I want to say this about the love thing. And I know we'll talk about it further, but
Larry, it's cool
if-
if you love me.
if you notice, the one that doesn't understand love is the genetically superior person.
yeah,
Everyone else seems to understand love much more than he does.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So I think
So-
if we're looking at this character as being a somewhat analog to Dick himself, it makes sense that this character doesn't understand like how to love and what what loss means and what, all those elements that he discusses in the book. That's it's the ordinary people that get it, and he just doesn't.
It's
I
happens-
have a very abstract question to ask you guys. Just based off of what I've noticed. Do you feel like Dick is becoming more and more and more self-involved with his writing the longer we're going along through his publication history? Because I feel like as we're
I should
going
hope
along,
so.
the books are becoming more and more and more and more about him in his life, as opposed to when we first started,
Yeah.
like with Solar Lottery.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, because I think they are.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
yeah, but we
But
saw
I
it.
also
We saw it
think-
as early as Clans of the Alphane Moon.
I also
I
think
think
he's
that's where it
branching.
starts.
He's branching out into literary elements that he wasn't touching on early in his career,
Right, because
So
as
he's
we've known,
expanding as
he
an
wants to
artist.
be.
as well as expanding his own, cathartic elements.
Well, I think you can be a literary writer without just writing about your fucking life problems, but that's a whole
Wow.
nother topic for
Yeah,
another.
right.
That's a whole nother
So-
topic for another
Yeah.
day. That's not related. But I agree with what you're saying.
Okay, so one of the most important fundamental things of this novel that I've been holding off talking about that's really important is the gas station scene. So, and this is important to PKD because this is the one that he thought happened in real life and proved that he was a prophet and that he could diagnose his son's hernia before it happened,
Okay.
and all that stuff, is that he wrote a scene in this novel where a character helped someone out at a gas station, right? And then he said that this happened to him in real life. And now, the reason I bring this up to him, in relation to the novel, and why it's so important, is that when he used this as an example of the what is love aspect of the novel, in the sense that, well, people will be looking at like the sexuality aspects of it. He, when asked what love means and how love is tied to reality, I thought of, there's the line in the movie Contact, the Jodie Foster, Matthew McConaughey,
Yeah.
based on the Carl Sagan. There's a line of dialogue in the book where Matthew McConaughey's religious character says to Jodie Foster's character, when she's like grilling him on like scientific things, and says, do you believe in God? And she's like, prove it. And then he said, do you love your father? Prove it. Right? He says, prove it. Right? And this whole scene with the gas station is, all he's doing is helping somebody out with a couple bucks, I think, if I recall correctly. And to PKD, it was this idea that he was showing love to this other person, that he was showing kindness and caring to this other person.
Compassion as love, basically.
So the different kinds of love, I don't want everyone to mistake the idea that it's just like the
pedophilia and incest
and the muff diving to contrition and all that
right.
stuff. Like, it's not about the phone sex. He
seems very angry about lesbians in this.
Well, but it isn't, but it also kind of is, because it is fairly significant in the book.
Okay,
but this scene is not just PKD being like, see, I did a nice thing for a black guy, patting myself on the back.
Right. Well,
you have a character who's desperate for human contact.
Right.
At that point in the book, he's like, if I don't talk to someone, I'm going to die. Because that's how I feel right now. I'm going to die if I don't talk to a human being. And so that's the relationship. I mean,
which is why
that's an aspect of love, is the compassion element, but it's also done out of desperation. So it's not like, if you accept a drink of water when you're dying of thirst, means that you're connecting with that person. It's not the same thing.
And since Phil, and obviously this is autobiographical, right? This is Phil. He needed that human contact. He needed that. He said it. That's why he had all the junkies there. That's whether this happened years after he wrote the book and proves that he's a prophet, or he's just misremembered.
Proves nothing.
Proves nothing. Or if he just remembers doing it.
I mean,
because who knows? Because
how often do you go to a gas station if you have a car? You go to a gas station a lot of times. Anytime you're at a gas station, someone could be in trouble and you can help them. I mean, this isn't something that happens once in a lifetime. So
yeah. So right, and with him like basically putting up the idea that Phil put up the idea that he was traveling back and forth between these other universes, that this reality break was happening to him. Perhaps it, in his mind, happened another time. We don't know. Sure. But what we do know is that this novel is more autobiographical in the sense of, I mean, it could be closer to his reality in the sense that he could have felt like these reality breaks were happening, and we don't know if it's it's an after effect of the mescaline that he was doing on a regular basis, or if he was really thinking that this was happening. Who knows?
Right. Yeah.
But what we do know is that it turned out to be a pretty interesting and unlike any other kind of science fiction novel that was happening before or after it.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, this. And where'd Anthony go? God damn it!
I'm pretty sure he probably went to the bathroom, but
yeah, I want him here when I get into when I read it the first time. I mean, I don't know what stories you have of this book, but
Yeah, I
It's a very
definitely.
important period of time.
So I originally read this during the first time we lived in San Diego around 2002.
Oh, so you read it later. You read it much later than I did.
Yeah, the first time I read Flow My Tears, around the time that I moved here, I had read that this was an alternate history novel about the Second American Civil War. That's how it was sold to me, and I read it, and I liked it at the time. I thought it was really good. I don't think I liked at the time. I liked that they thought it was, this. I immediately was drawn to the idea that there isn't just one universe, that there's like this kind of multitude of universes. I enjoyed that aspect of it. I definitely got more out of reading it this time as my 29th.
Yeah.
Well, 29th
in a row PKD.
29th in a row PKD novel, because I've still already read Valis, so technically it would have been my 30th PKD novel to have read, and but
well, we got a couple more that I've read after this, but
yeah. So I think the only
It's
other
all new to me, baby. It's all new to me now.
the only other duplicate I think I have after this one is Valis, but that being said, it was a much better reading experience this time, and I feel like I got a lot more out of it, partially because I think I'm a little bit more aware at this point. I know more, and then partially because I know more about PKD.
Yeah, both of those things matter. So I want to talk about when I first read this book. When I first read this book, it was 1994. I was living in San Francisco.
Nine Inch Nails were hot.
I was hanging out with a bunch of Sonoma college kids, Sonoma State college kids, and going down to the City Lights bookstore, reading stuff by Kerouac, Burroughs, Bukowski, doing all those things. J.D. Salinger comes into play here, and I started reading all the PKD books that I read. And this was not one of the first. This was one of the last ones I read. I think I read this, Crap Artist, and the Transmigration of Timothy Archer as the last three books I read of his. And this book fed into all that literary stuff I was getting from all those other things. It fit in so perfectly with just those other things where plot didn't really fucking matter at all. Who cares what's happening when you're reading the cut-up method? Like none of that matters. It's all about characters and people and understanding how relationships work, and whether the mystery is solved or not doesn't fucking matter at all. So to me, that was the fundamental importance of this book, was learning about these different types of relationships, and finding it in a sci-fi author was incredible, like an incredible discovery. Because sci-fi to me was still all the kind of shoot 'em up stuff, or the very funny stuff like Douglas Adams and stuff like that. So this is I guess it was a sort of a turning point to understand that you can get literature anywhere, and you can tie story in, and I don't know. It was very important to me in that way. I know a lot more now about than I did back then, obviously.
And just for a little behind the scenes, like
Carol and shit like that. So.
Anthony and I reread this book recently ahead of you. Like, we both finished it.
Yeah.
And started in our group chat. We started to discuss it before you had gone back to read it.
Right. Yeah, I just finished it this morning. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, that much different than us. Yeah, because I think we were both done over a week ago. So,
yep.
It is a totally different experience for reading. Okay, so Anthony, do you want to talk about ahead of ranking, or would you like? Because we've already given our overall thoughts. I feel like Larry and I could just rank at this point. And then
I mean, I was gonna
get
work it
into
in.
it.
I was gonna work it into my ranking. So why don't
Go for it. Let's do it.
So we starting our rankings.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
David, go first.
obviously 5 out of 5 flip flaps. For me, this is I think one of PKD's best novels. I think it is up there with your Three Stigmatas, your Man in the High Castle. There's a reason why it's collected with those books in the American New Library. I know Valis, I think, is collected with that as like kind of the fourth pillar of his like masterpieces. I wouldn't. I might have different masterpieces, and I know like I like Martian Times, what you guys didn't, but I would.
The earlier books.
Yeah, and even though I have great affection for the work of the 50s, and think Eye in the Sky is better than Ubik in a lot of senses, this goes up there with Ubik and Eye in the Sky, and is one of the best. I think it's solid as hell. There's a few things that annoy me, and there's a few nitpicks, but all those things are minor compared to the things that outweigh the cringy, weird twin relationship things. And so overall, yeah, I love it. Great masterpiece. Larry.
So, all right. Well, for me, like I said, this book was sort of a turning point, and it was really the first time I looked at Philip K. Dick as a literary author, as someone that had chops. Like, I had read his stories before, and they had been good stories, but I didn't think of him as someone that could, like, do J.D. Salinger or anything even remotely close. And he's not fucking J.D. Salinger. Like, he's not quite that level of literary author, but he certainly went away from the pulp sci-fi that I was reading at the time. But overall, this is, I agree with David, one of the best books I've read of his, and that still stands today. So I am going to give it 5 Derringers out of 5.
Whoa, rare 5-star rating for Mr.
It's
Tweed.
only the second one I've ever given.
All right, Anthony.
All right, well, hold my beers, Anthony said.
Yes. I'm all about this.
Why?
I want to hear it.
So I would like to start with some dialogue that stood out to me towards the end, more the middle of the book. It's on page 118. Love isn't just wanting another person the way you want to own an object you see in a store. That's just desire. You want to have it around, take it home, set it up somewhere in the apartment like a lamp. Love is, she paused, reflecting, like a father saving his children from a burning house, gaining them out and dying himself. When you love, you cease to live for yourself. You live for another person. And then later, on the next page, towards the bottom, they're discussing, death. And Ruth says, "But you can grieve," Ruth said anxiously, studying his face. "Jason, grief is the most powerful emotion a man or child or animal can feel. It's a good feeling." "In what fucking way?" he said harshly. Right? Grief causes you to leave yourself. You step outside your narrow little pelt, and you can't feel grief unless you've had love before it. Grief is the final outcome of love, because it's love lost. You do understand, I know you do, but you just don't want to think about it. It's the cycle of love completed. To love, to lose, to feel, grief, to leave, and then to love again. Jason, grief is awareness that you will have to be alone, and there is nothing beyond that, because alone is the ultimate final destiny of each individual living creature. That's what death is, the great loneliness. Now, that's great, but none of this fucking book earns any of that. So, like I said, hold my beers. You set up this character who's unlike any of Dick's other protagonists. He's an unlikable, womanizing, snarky asshole. He has all the confidence that none of the other characters do. Hell yeah, I'm on board. Check plus from Anthony. Let's do this. So we drop him. He gets this alien attached to him, and it all changes from here, right? But by the end of the book, I don't really feel like Jason Taverner had any real arc. I don't think he ever suffered. I don't think he ever felt that real hurt of, I used to be amazing and famous, and now I'm just this, like, unknown celebrity, right? It's never really explored outside of a few couple moments where he's like, oh yeah, this sucks, but you know what? I'm a 6. I'm just going to plow through and get it done, right? And every step of the way, it always just kind of works out for him. He wakes up in the hotel. The guy at the hotel takes him to where he can get his IDs made. And okay, so that problem's solved. The police department's so milquetoast, they're like, whatever. And I agree with you that it's more insidious for them to be like, oh, it's fine, go ahead and leave. But we're still watching you. I'm into. But I never felt like at any point in time Jason Taverner did anything but just be confused and irritated about his situation. And that, to me, was a huge downfall for me enjoying the majority of this book, because had the book earned the dialogue I just read, it would have been a 5 out of 5 for me, because it is different. It's different in the way that we're following a character that Dick doesn't very often explore, right?
Or ever.
Or ever. But I don't think the execution was where I felt it needed to be impactful to me. Not to mention all the weird sex stuff where I couldn't figure out like where he's really coming from. And then there's a later moment in the diner between him and, I forget her name, the woman that makes the pots.
Mary,
where they're talking about critics, and he's like, well, people are going to tell you that it's shit. People are going to tell you that it's the best thing they've ever heard, and you just kind of got to, they're going to talk about you and talk about things you did 19 years ago as if it just happened yesterday. and I wanted to see more of that struggle. I wanted to see more of that struggle of this guy who's had it made, because that's the journey to me, because growth is the journey. And then we tack on this epilogue where I imagined it was just like the final like still shot of a movie, and it's just like so and so went on to make pots, and this other person went on to do this.
Frame.
Yeah, freeze frame with the text with the title cards over it, and that is really where it fell short for me. All the ideas and all like the stuff you guys have been talking about, which is why I've just been listening, I agree with, but I remember going back to what David Gill said, where he was saying that, Dick would have wanted to know if he had done a good job as a writer too. And for me, from the perspective of character, I don't think he did. And I don't think you're wrong in saying that it's very literary, because it is. But I don't think the execution was there for me. And so I'm going to give it 3 out of 5 unearthed BDSM magazines. and I'm also going to tack on that The Catcher in the Rye is one of the worst fucking books ever written. You're welcome.
The what?
The Catcher in the Rye is one of the worst books I've ever read in my life.
All right.
I'm not a huge fan of it, but I wouldn't say it was the worst.
It's just. I mean, honestly, it's kind of.
Well, you're just.
It's kind of like this, where it's like I'm gonna wander around and whine and never learn a goddamn thing.
Yes.
So.
Yes, it is. It seems to be a form that you do not like.
I would say that most literary fiction.
You want characters to grow and learn. And sometimes that doesn't happen.
Oh, and you're totally right. I just and had there been more of a struggle for Taverner, had I seen him at least like we watch him deal with this lack of celebrity, and even at the end he's still like, yeah, I went through it, but I still made it back to my mansion. I'd be like, you didn't learn a goddamn thing, did you? Right? But none of that's there in the middle of the book for me. And I'm not saying, and I don't disagree with you guys, but I definitely had a different reading and experience than you did.
No, and that's fair. And
yep.
I hope some of the
some of the PKD fans that listen to us will agree with Anthony.
Why?
Because why should it all be one way?
I don't know.
Yeah. No, and I think it's good to get a different perspective on it. I mean, if we were all...
If it was
I don't
another
know.
3 stigmata, just standing ovation across the board.
Yeah, right.
And
Well-
I understand that this is Dick really kind of chartering the waters of that literary territory that he's always wanted to be in, and for that I can definitely commend him. But it's not there for me.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. All right.
And
goddamn, we've gone so long. I don't know how much I want to give to the Kim Stanley Robinson stuff, but
Well, hit your favorite quote.
he says, the premise, as Damon Knight has remarked, is one that creates situations that cannot be made logical or coherent. The facts of the narrative cannot be reconciled to each other. Using Dick's explanation for them, it's another of the novels in which inconsistency is part of the structural fabric. So he's saying that like the inconsistencies is just like a whole part of it. And then he also, one thing he said is that this is another version of the miracle in our friends from Frolics 8, except in this case, the elite is defeated by a god more like the Holy Spirit than the Jehovah alien in our friends. In any case, it's a quiet one of Dick's most moving scenes, making his case for human solidarity without the desperate didactism of our friends. And he used didactism, which is one of Cody's favorite words.
Oh, yeah.
As far as movie treatment, we almost got it. In 2007, the Halcyon Company acquired the first look rights to Dick's works, and in 2009, they announced, immediately after finishing Terminator Salvation, that next they were going to adapt Flow My Tears, a Policeman Said. Apparently, Terminator Salvation did not do so well because that movie never got made. I agree with Anthony as far as my movie treatment goes. I would do it as a limited series and be able to expand it out a little bit. And I think you're right, Anthony. We need a little bit more of an arc for Jason Taverner, and we would definitely have to have like a Bradley Cooper or somebody play Taverner, who's like one of those ridiculously handsome actors.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. For that, you definitely need one of those. And I think you could make.
Yeah, you'd need a rom-com leading man who's
Yeah, and you need a couple. The reason why you need a miniseries and a couple episodes is so you can really build out and expand the kind of unreality or the multiverseness of it, like where
Right.
like the slightly different universes could be played out over different episodes. So, and who would I get to direct that? I don't know, but since I'm doing it for TV, I'm probably going to get a bunch of TV directors. So, you could do some really fun stuff with that. So, I don't know who I would direct it because you're going to have multiple episodes, but. So yeah, I would definitely do that for a limited series. Apple TV Plus, because they've been making kick-ass shit.
Ugh.
Dude, they have. You cannot fuck
All
with
right.
their Apple.
All right, that's a
Apple in
that's a
every
different
way, shape, and
podcast.
form.
Okay.
I mean, we're still not allowed on iTunes, but
Yeah, they can eat a D.
Eat a dough.
sure. He meant Dick, David.
Oh, okay. Dicklike Suggestions, and then we're done.
What about Larry's
I
adaptation?
wouldn't make that.
What about
movie.
my
I wouldn't make that
adaptation?
mini-series.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry, Larry. I missed you. Yeah. Larry,
And Anthony.
First of all, that would be a movie. First of all, straight up. We don't need that much time with this. This is about people, but we don't need to spend like half an hour talking soap opera style about how they feel. This would be just sort of a generic, January movie that no one really thinks about a lot.
shooting high.
Yeah.
Wow, you're really selling me on this pitch in the room.
I just don't think it would be that.
You don't think it would make a good film?
No, I think it would be an art film more than
Oh.
anything else. So it's not going to make a lot of noise or anything like that. It's not a big action thing like they always want to make PKD stuff. Yeah, it's just going to be a little film about people, sort of, I guess, Looper style, where it's not big, giant booms and all that stuff. It's more like definitely the story going. So yeah, I'd get that dude to do it.
I would compare. I think instead of Looper, because there is a lot of action in Looper, I would say what you're describing is more Gattaca.
Gattaca, sure, Gattaca.
Yeah, Andrew Niccol would be a good director for Florida.
Yeah, that wouldn't be bad. I mean, that works.
Yeah. Anthony,
I'm gonna go. Oh, I did. I'm going with the miniseries, man. And I actually disagree. I think if you can show more of this world and more of the relationships between the people through a couple episodes at like a half an hour, it will make that arc and that journey much more of a payoff by the end.
It's a visual medium, guys.
Dialogue is important. Dialogue is fucking important.
As a writer.
Dialogue is important to this one because so much of it is character interactions, and it's going to be the subtleties of this world to that world.
You do that with a look.
You could. And I would agree with you.
It needs to be both.
I would agree that, and the reason why I brought up the Gattaca comparison is that Gattaca is a science fiction movie that has very little special effects in it, and a lot of it is done with mood and tone, and I think
words, lots of words,
lots of words, and I think Gattaca works. I like that movie a lot. And I think that's kind of the approach that you take with Full of My Tears is you do it subtle. And one thing you can do in the miniseries is that you can build up the police state stuff in a way that where you started off really subtle and milquetoast like it is in the novel, and then if you do want to do like kind of more of an actiony ending, then that kind of wraps up the arc more. Then you build to it. And then you have time to build.
But yeah, because your finale has to happen with Alice dying and that sort of leading into the finale, because you can't just have the cop cruising around feeling bad about himself for an hour.
You definitely have to have a flip-flap chase.
I just want to point out that we're sitting here talking about subtlety in a book where in the first like 20 pages a dude gets like injured by getting a fucking alien attached to his chest. So everybody just keep your like it needs to be subtlety, okay? It could be a little strange.
Yeah.
No, strange is fine. Like Moon.
All right, that's it. That was
Moon is strange. That's the sort of level I'm talking about of film,
Oh yeah, he would be Bowie's son. Duncan Jones would be a good director for that too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Big recommend on Mute, y'all. Still.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we're the Mute fan society because
basically it's just us.
Like us and Carrie. That's it. That's the only people that like to Mute. I love that.
Speaking of past PKD suggestions, is that our next?
Yeah. That was
Dicklike Suggestions.
Yeah, we should see if Duncan Jones will come on the show just because we loved Mute.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. All right, so Dicklike Suggestions. Anthony, you got anything this month?
Yeah, so last weekend we went to Las Vegas and we ended up going to this art installation that Meow Wolf is doing called Omega Mart, which is this really cool, they built up this weird kind of grocery store with a bunch of weird products everywhere, and it's a little strange and it's a little kind of sci-fi-y. But then what I didn't realize is I didn't read anything about it is there are these back entryways into this entirely expansive back area, which has got all this crazy interactive artwork. There's cool simulations of things. It's super strange. We spent 3 hours in there.
Where is it at?
Las Vegas.
No, is it in one of the casinos, or is it?
Oh, okay.
Just its own site?
It's in this big thing called Area 15, which has a really great restaurant. It's got VR experiences. Huh. It's got a barcade. It's got all these other cool kind of things
on the strip.
No, it's off the strip.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And it might be a little more in line with things like Blade Runner and Altered Carbon, but just the weird like shift from reality from the grocery store portion to the back area I thought was really cool and surreal. And if you're interested in seeing any of what it looks like, you can follow my Instagram because I've been posting it all week. Which is,
the pictures are cool.
Yeah, which is Anthony_Trevino Trevino 976.
Anthony, I'm really proud of you, son.
Thanks.
I'm really proud of you.
Thanks.
For not only having a Dicklike suggestion, but a really good and interesting one. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Kudos, man.
And this mug is almost bigger than my hand. So.
It's huge, by the way. Huge.
All right, I'm going to go next and then let Larry close it out. I have two short ones. One is film, the 2011 Michael Shannon joint Take Shelter, which we rewatched this week, and it is a art house horror film about schizophrenia and paranoia. And fuck anyone who doesn't think it's a horror movie, because it is a horror movie. And Michael Shannon's incredible in it, and it's one of the most terrifying scenes is just a scene where he talks to his mother, and you should see it. And then the other one is I just finished reading a novel by Rivers Solomon. They are non-binary author from England who writes science fiction, horror, and fantasy, and this new novel, I was about to say it, Sorrow Land, is just a really incredible novel, coming-of-age horror, science fiction, fantasy novel that's kind of like a superhero origin story, but what I think is Dick-like about it is it really kind of very subtly deconstructs society. So, and it's the story of
break that down a little.
Yeah, so the main character is a woman named Vern who's 15 years old and pregnant and escapes from a Black Panther compound called the Sons of Cain or something like that. And they have this compound where they're living outside of the grid of society, and she escapes and gives birth to twins and raises them off the grid in the wild. And then... So
like Hannah, kind of.
Yes. Yeah, actually, but way weirder. And then basically it's kind of brought... They find their way back to society, and then there's some fucked up shit that was going on that was even worse and weirder than she realized.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't want to give it away, but it's kind of got a superhero origin story kind of feel to it in the third act, and yeah, it's really good stuff. Cool. Just finished reading that, so yep. Larry.
Well, I mean, I really didn't have anything much coming into today because I've been playing some ordinary video games for a change. But I will say Moon. I mean, like, how have we not said that one yet? Yeah, it's all about like what is real, who is human, all that kind of stuff. And maybe you can find a dub that doesn't have Kevin Spacey's voice.
Yeah. Well, that adds a different creepiness to Moon.
Yeah, right. That adds a whole new level of creepy in there.
Great soundtrack for writing, too. All right. Well, on that note, our next book is finally...
Oh, shit. What was it?
Confessions of a Crap Artist. So we're finally getting to one of PKD's attempts at literary fiction, which finally got published in 1975. So we're going to get to the year 1975 next.
And again, this is one that I read around the same time I read Flow My Tears, and as I recall, I really loved it. It's one of my favorites, but we'll see. We'll see. Maybe I'll think it's
Well,
crap.
Larry,
You never know.
Rolling Stone
crap
called it
artist.
a funny, horribly accurate portrait of a life in California in the 50s.
Okay.
Mm.
I don't even
that-
remember that about it. So
Is that all the teas we're getting?
No, I'm just waiting for you guys to tell me action.
yeah, go for it.
And go.
Jack Isidore doesn't see the world like most people. According to his brother-in-law Charlie, he's a crap artist, obsessed with his own bizarre theories and ideas, which he fanatically records in his many notebooks. He's so grossly unequipped for real life that his sister and brother-in-law feel compelled to rescue him from it. But while Faye and Charlie Hume put on a happy face for the world, they prove to be just as sealed off from reality, in thrall to obsessions that are slightly more acceptable than Jack's, but a great deal uglier. Their constant fighting and betrayals threaten their own marriage and the relationships of everyone around them. When they bring Jack into their home, he finds himself in the middle of a maelstrom of suburban angst from which he might not be able to escape. And Anthony is already bored. I'm just kidding.
Why do
I'm
you
just kidding.
hate
Actually,
people? Oh wait,
Yeah.
never mind.
no.
I
I'm
know the
just-
answer to that one.
I'm just kidding. It actually sounds like an interesting PKD take on conspiracy theorists, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, as I recall, it was awesome. But we also have the movie, so we'll be doing an episode on that after the book. So
Let's
wrap it up.
Let's wrap this up. Flow My Tears, great classic novel, and
Split opinions, just like it should be.
yeah, and if you listen to us this long, then stay paranoid.
Be all paranoid and shit.
Goodbye.